Hi Martyn, thank you so much for coming onto the Kind Minds series today and chatting to us about settling into university and that transition, which so many of our students will be experiencing right now. And actually it does feel, though it is particularly relevant to those starting university for the first time, it's also applicable to students who are returning to university. Most students spend a significant amount of time over the summer months back at home and then having to come back and readapt and adjust to university life again. And it feels particularly important to just acknowledge that we have had significant interruptions since March as a result of COVID. So actually for all of us coming back to university this September, October, it's going to be different and it's going to be a new norm that we're all going to have to adapt to and settle into. So I'm really looking forward to chatting to you about this topic.
Yeah, hi Jess, me too. Good to talk to you.
Yeah, and I think it's really important, just before we get into it, to acknowledge that for many students, university will be the best time of their lives and they'll have an amazing experience, and that is exactly, you know, what we want and what we hope for every single student at Imperial. And perhaps you're about to start this adventure and you've heard a lot from others about their amazing experiences and you have sky high expectations. But on this video, we just want to be really real here and just acknowledge that university can be quite a difficult time for many students. So we just want to be realistic about the challenges that students might face and how to overcome these. And just to let students know that whether you are starting university for the first time and finding it a bit difficult to settle in, or you're returning and struggling to adapt to this new way that we're going to have to be working, that it is normal and it's okay and you're definitely not alone. So yeah, that being said, let's get into it. And I guess where I want to start is I was thinking about the context of university, and it really feels like it's about transition, you know, moving from one thing to another. So how can we define transition?
Yeah, well, if we consider that, you know, at some point in our lives, all of us will experience some kind of change or transitional phase. And broadly speaking, that's starting something new or giving something up. And some of these transitions are positive. So something that we're looking forward to is starting, or some will feel a lot more negative, like losing something or someone dear to us. The thing to bear in mind is whatever we feel about the change, whether it's welcomed or dreaded, if it's inevitable or completely unexpected, there's nearly always going to be a fear of the unknown, which provokes anxiety in us. And even with positive change, there'll be the concern over whether we are good enough or we achieve the success that we hope we do. And there's the element of, you know, what if we're disappointed with what we look forward to? So regardless of the change being negative or positive, there's always some element of anxiety, I think.
Yeah, and starting university really kind of fits with all of those things. It's, you know, going to be something that we've probably worked really hard towards or aimed for. It's the unknown and there's a lot of uncertainty there. And it's also starting something new, which often means leaving the old behind, which might be a sense of loss for some people. So presumably all of these things is why coming to university is such a big transition.
Sure, I think there are a couple of big reasons for that. You might experience the feeling of being, you know, feeling like a big fish in a small pond to moving to being a small fish in a big pond. On a practical level, you will find bigger course sizes, more people that you're studying with, and so there's the potential there to feel that there's less chance to ask questions, or you might feel left behind. And, you know, for international students, there'll be the added challenge of adapting to culture shock or some language difficulties, perhaps. If we see the change, though, the moving to university in terms of development in our life stages, it's about becoming an independent adult. It's about moving away to university and looking after yourself. So becoming responsible for ourselves, our health, our money, our learning, self-directed learning rather than being told what to do, if you like.
Yeah.
being in control of our choices and our lifestyle, and all of that can feel overwhelming, as well as exciting.
Yeah, so there's sort of the educational changes from what we're used to in school to then having much more autonomy at university, and also those really big changes, as you've mentioned, about being really independent all of a sudden and making all the decisions for ourselves, which I think for some students can come as a bit of a shock.
Yeah. And I guess every transition presents two challenges, if you like. There's the leaving behind the familiar, and there's adapting to the new. And this seems particularly pertinent when we're talking about settling into university. It's normal to feel homesick or out of our depth or in limbo, and that can impact on us and on our motivation. I guess it could be helpful to view settling into university as sort of like dealing with a loss or a grief. And we might find ourselves moving through a transitional stage, if you like. So we could feel particularly sad or overwhelmed at one stage, or we might feel the need to keep ourselves very busy so that we can cope with these feelings. We could feel stuck within a stage, a bit like we do when we're experiencing a kind of loss. And it's then we might find ourselves experimenting with new behaviour or new roles, and that could well involve us making mistakes. And that's all part of adapting to change. And I would argue it's the only way we do adapt to change is by making those mistakes along the way as we try new ways of behaving.
Yeah, I love that. And I think it's really important to recognise that things will always be changing and evolving. And sometimes students really might feel good and like they're settling well and they're making good decisions and they're feeling really content. And then other times they might have a week where they might struggle a bit and feel a bit stuck in one of those particular stages.
Yeah.
With that in mind, do you think there are any particular times of the year when students do tend to struggle with that settling in, or equally with coming back if they've returned? I know from my own experience at university, I really struggled in my first year when I came back after Christmas time, and I found that really hard.
Yeah, I can certainly relate to that myself. I suppose there are certain times of the year where it'll feel harder than others. I'm thinking about it in terms of seasons. So coming back to university in the middle of winter will be very hard for some of us. Or it might be that we struggle after we were spending time with loved ones at home, and then we have to come back and get used to the idea of them not being around anymore. But I think a really common experience is the novelty factor. Starting somewhere new, all the excitement, particularly for first years of Freshers Week and inductions, all the events around that, and meeting new people. And then we might find ourselves crashing later in the term as we come to terms with the new normal, if you like.
Yeah, and that's not to say that the beginning of term shouldn't be exciting and new, but I really hear what you're saying is that we shouldn't then worry when that excitement and adrenaline does start to fade and the normality of university life settles in. I think another important thing to remember is that some people just might struggle more than others, depending on what they're leaving behind and their home and their attachments and their experiences. And for international students especially, it just, it's a whole culture or new country that they then have to adapt to.
Yeah, that's right. And I guess a key factor in us feeling able to settle somewhere new is our relationship with who or what we've left behind, and our views and feelings towards the change we're making. Are we open to the change? Is it something that we're excited about or more apprehensive about? And as you say, for some of our students, just adapting to a new culture will be a huge change in itself to contend with.
Yeah, and I think that I would add here that it's totally fine to feel apprehensive, and you shouldn't compare how you're feeling to how someone else is feeling. And this is just that classic comparison anxiety which we all can feel, and I would imagine that is heightened actually when you start university, especially with social media, and we don't realize we're doing it, but we often, I think, compare what other people are posting about. And in this context it might be students posting about having the best time and meeting loads of new people, and we will see that, but then we're unlikely to see the other moments where they might be feeling a little bit homesick or a bit lonely. And we end up then comparing our whole reality to just a very small snapshot of someone else's. And I think there might be students who really are coping very well, and perhaps they're very confident and they've dealt with a lot of change already before, so they're quite comfortable with it. But there will be many students who are feeling apprehensive, perhaps spending time away from home for the first time. And students just need to be kind to themselves about how they're feeling.
Absolutely, yeah. And we all have different levels of tolerance to change and different ways of coping with it. And if we think about our coping strategies, whether we are aware of having them or not, they'll come from our personality traits or our background, or perhaps what's worked before, what's been our previous way of coping with change, if you like. Each transition that we experience will test us and also enable us to learn new ways of dealing with it.
Yeah. So I think my big question now is then, how can we cope with or approach these changes?
Yeah, that is a good question. Like I say, it's not until we experience change that we know how we do cope with it and what our preferred way of coping with it is, if you like. For some of us, settling into university will be our first change to deal with. And so that's normal for that to feel like more of a challenge. That's okay to find that difficult. In terms of coping strategies, it could be helpful to divide them into emotion-focused and problem or task-focused strategies. So emotion-focused strategies will be us being in touch with how we feel about the change, understanding and managing our stress more, or turning to other people for support, perhaps, or doing what we need to do to make ourselves feel better. Whereas problem or task focused strategies is more about us focusing on the problem, doing what we need to do. So that could be changing our academic course if we are finding it's not the right one for us, or it might be joining a society or making our room feel more homely. So really doing something. But the best approach is really to do what works for you and what's worked before. If that's not working, or if this is your first real experience of change and you're finding it very difficult, I think it's more about doing a variety of things rather than being reliant on one way of coping.
Yeah.
So, for example, if your preferred way of coping is to be very practical, then you might find that if you're experiencing homesickness in response to settling in, which is a very common feeling, you might find it helpful for you to consider a more emotion-focused strategy alongside the practical approach. So turning to people for support, for example, rather than just trying to keep busy. If we're reliant on one method of coping, I think that's when the problems start, and we might find ourselves feeling stuck or depleted. So it's really about being flexible. So coping with change is about being flexible with how we cope with change.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned about not becoming reliant on one form of coping and making sure there's a range of things you're doing to support yourself with the change. And I guess that can feel quite difficult, because it might mean proactively choosing to do some things that maybe don't come naturally to you, perhaps going out of your comfort zone to meet new people, for example. And interestingly, some of the things we're discussing feel quite similar to the stuff from our resilience kind mind episodes. And I wonder if you think there is an element here of the need for resilience to cope with change and settling into university.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me, being resilient means acknowledging that some moments are difficult, and it's okay to feel vulnerable, and it's important to be kind to yourself as well as to take action. So it's that combination of being kind to yourself and being more proactive, which for me is about being resilient.
Yeah. Okay, so for those over the next few weeks who are starting university or returning, do you have any tips or advice for them on what can help with this transition?
Yeah, I guess the key point is about contact with others. So deciding how much contact you want with loved ones at home. And it might be that if you're able to, you would like to arrange a visit home, or regular contact with people that you're missing. Or it might be that it's okay not to have contact with those at home. It could be that people at home are finding the change harder than you are. I would encourage being open to the potential of new relationships without fear of losing the old ones.
Yeah.
Do what works for you. Don't feel pressured to do one thing over another. For some students who've got a very strong attachment to home, it'll be much harder to create new attachments to their new place, their new setting. So it's really about what is individual to you.
Yeah. And I think it is only natural to want to go back to what is familiar and comfortable. That, as you're saying, perhaps engaging too much in that and giving a lot of energy to that then takes away from being able to build those new attachments with your new university life, which feels quite important for settling in.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one way to create those new attachments, or make them stronger, if you like, is by doing stuff like joining a society or taking up a hobby and engaging in an extracurricular activity, because those kinds of things can bring you into contact with others who might be feeling the same way as you are. And I guess I should say at this point, if you are finding it difficult to make friends or to form strong attachments, it could be a time to reach out to others and talk to one of our counsellors here at the Student Counselling Service, or talk to a tutor or supervisor, or to a chaplain, for example. We also run an online support group called Online Connect at the Student Counselling Service, where you can meet others who might be feeling in a similar way to you.
Yeah, and so important, touching on that comparative anxiety again, that you may have friends who speak to their families a lot, and you may have friends who you live with who go and visit home a lot because they live really nearby. But you also may have friends who really don't speak to their families from home or friends from home very much. So it's important, as you said, to just do what's right for you and not compare yourself to how someone else is choosing to settle in and create new attachments.
Absolutely. And just to reiterate, it'll be a much harder process for international students to maintain this contact with home. Travelling home will be a lot more difficult during the academic year, and particularly in the current climate of COVID, it's extremely difficult to travel. And there'll be the extra challenge potentially of needing to self-isolate if you have been home abroad.
Yeah, and that can be really difficult, because I think it is quite grounding knowing that you can go home if you need to. So having those travel restrictions might understandably cause some anxiety for some of our students. And as I've already said, if that's you, do speak to someone at the university about it. And there is actually a specific Imperial College webpage for international students with lots of information and support on there. So we'll link that in our website. But whilst we're speaking about that transition from home, I wonder, is it helpful to have reminders of home, in your room and in your space? And can that be soothing, or can that reinforce homesickness?
Yeah, that's a good point. I really think it's about what's individual to you. It's about deciding whether or not it's helpful for you to maintain those links with the familiar. So it could be about making your room feel comfortable, having items from home that you brought with you that gives your room some familiarity, if you like. If home has a lot more negative connotations for you, then of course it's about making your room feel safe and your own, rather than reminding you of home.
Yeah.
I think another way of really combating homesickness, if you like, is keeping up an existing hobby, or doing the things that you would normally do that you enjoy doing. Really treating yourself to something. So it's about integrating the old with the new. Yeah.
Important points to make, because I think ultimately you're still you. You're still going to enjoy a lot of the same things and have the same belongings, and not every single thing has to change when you go to university. And having those things from the old can be quite grounding as well, and give you what I assume would be then a nice solid foundation to go off and explore new things and new possibilities and new hobbies.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's about getting the balance right, isn't it, between the old and the new. And linked to that balance for me is as a work-life balance. So you're making time for yourself to develop new friendships, new relationships, doing things you enjoy, looking after yourself in terms of sleep and diet and exercise, as well as finding time to do your academic work. Having this balance, I think, is really key to feeling more robust or resilient to deal with the change.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, we might find ourselves feeling depleted or burnt out even.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that word balance is just really important, as you've mentioned, and it seems that they are quite intertwined. If we can find a balance between the old and the new, and this then helps us work out our work-life balance too. So we've touched on a lot, but before we wrap up, I just wondered if you had anything else that you wanted to share with students regarding settling into university.
Yeah, I guess it's just to really reiterate, the central theme of all these videos, which is self-compassion, being kind to yourself. And it's okay to feel the way that you do, and acknowledge and accept the feelings that you have are a normal response to change and dealing with change, rather than fall into the trap of labeling yourself as weak for not coping or blaming yourself for not coping. I think this acceptance of how we feel will give us far more capacity to cope with change. So yeah, be kind to yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. And if there's one message we want students to hear from the entire series, it is exactly that: be kind to yourself. So thank you so much, Martyn, for all your thoughts and advice on this. And we hope that you watching or listening have found it very helpful. And do, direct your mates to this video if you feel like they might be struggling to settle in themselves. And we would recommend you checking out our webpage that goes along with this video for resources and links to other web pages at the university, for more practical advice as well on things like accommodation and finances and academic concerns. So head to the Student Support Zone website for that information. And hopefully we'll see you in our next episode, which is on how to cope with stress and anxiety. So another really important and relevant topic. So thanks again, Martyn, and hopefully see everyone next time.
Thanks, Jess. Bye.